Welcome, everyone. The presentation is about to begin. This session will be recorded and will last 60 minutes. Please keep your microphones muted during presentation and turn off your web cameras. If you have a question or a comment, enter it in the chat during presentation and the presenter will address it in the end. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after this live event. My name is Natalia Balasnikova. I'm the co-chair of Intercultural Communication Interest Section at TESOL, and I'm happy to co-host this webinar with Dr. Joshua Gordon. Next slide, please. So before we begin, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is the Intercultural Communication Intersection. We are the intersection within TESOL, and what we do is we address the ever-growing needs of language teachers across the world who must engage in intercultural communication when they're teaching in their home countries or abroad. In addition to our work during the association's convention, we practice webinars, which are both practice-focused and academic ones. We also host informal coffee hours throughout the year. We do Pecha Kucha and lightning talks, which are short presentations, and we have regular newsletter issues that we publish and share with the membership. Next slide, please. We would love to have you join us. So how you can join, your first step would be to become the member of TESOL International. And when you are a member of TESOL International, you can join ICIS through my TESOL portal by going to the home account and choosing our section. And there you will have access to a lot of resources and conversations among the members. But we also have a very active social media. Here you can see our Facebook address. We have a new Twitter feed, which will be used to advertise about our different events. And we also have a very active LinkedIn page. So please join us at all of these social media spaces. Next slide, please. Just to look forward to what we're having after this webinar, we have a very exciting event which will be happening in January, which is lightning talks, very short presentations, only 5 minutes, about your practical stories and your experiences in the classroom. Please pay attention to our announcements. The deadline for submissions is December 5th. Next slide, please. And also this year, we will have an upcoming event, which will be an open leadership meeting, which will be happening in on December 3rd at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, US and Canada. You will have access to the detail through my TESOL portal. We really invite all of you to come and talk to us about your visions, your needs, and how the intersection can help you grow in the association. And now I'm passing on to Jennifer Croy, who will introduce our speaker today.
Great, thank you so much, Natalia, for welcoming everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer LaCroix. I am happy to serve as the co-chair of the Intercultural Communication Interest Section with Natalia. It is our absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Joshua Gordon today. Josh is an assistant professor of TESOL and applied linguistics at the University of Northern Iowa. He received his PhD in second language studies from Indiana University, Bloomington. He has taught ESL, EFL, and Spanish as a foreign language, and he has trained pre-service and in-service teachers in the United States and in Costa Rica. His research interests include second language pronunciation teaching and learning, second language teacher cognition, and non-native speaking teachers of English. Without further ado, please let me present Dr. Josh Gordon.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today and for your interest in my webinar. My name is Joshua Gordon, and today I'll discuss different tensions with teaching pronunciation, specifically issues related to intelligibility versus first language accents in intercultural communication settings. This is my presentation overview for today. So here's a short overview. These are the different aspects that I will discuss today. First, I'll talk about the role of pronunciation in oral communication, and then I'll discuss how the current state of the English language around the world is calling for adjustments in terms of pronunciation teaching. I'll also discuss some of the recent research findings that have been put out in the literature about non-native speaking teachers and pronunciation teaching. And finally, I will discuss what teachers, both native and non-native speaking teachers, can do to implement pronunciation instruction to enhance communication in intercultural settings, and then my concluding remarks. And before I continue, I would like to disclose that the goal of this presentation is not to claim that non-native speaking teachers are better pronunciation teachers than native speaking teachers, or vice versa. What research has demonstrated is that many teachers, both native and non-native, don't feel very confident teaching pronunciation for different reasons. But in the specific case of non-native speaking teachers, there is also the pressure of having a foreign accent. So many teachers don't necessarily feel very comfortable with that accent. So if you're a native speaking teacher, part of my purpose with this presentation is to encourage you to implement more pronunciation in your classes and incorporate non-native speaking models. And if you're a non-native speaking teacher, my purpose is also to encourage you to teach pronunciation, because there are positive aspects about it that could be very beneficial for your students. So let's start with second language pronunciation in oral communication. So speaking, oral communication, it's a phenomenon composed of different factors, and pronunciation in a second language is key for effective oral communication. Clear, intelligible pronunciation is a necessary skill for oral communication in intercultural settings. That is, not just between first and second language speakers, but also among groups of second language speakers that who don't necessarily share the same native language background. And research in second language speech, in second language speech development has demonstrated that there are specific aspects that enhance or affect the production of intelligible second language speech, such as word stress, sentence stress, pausing, issues like pitch range, or even the articulation of very specific vowels and consonants, and even aspects like speech rate in some cases. So all of them can affect the intelligibility of a second language speech. There are some basic concepts that we need to understand here first before we move forward. And this is the distinction made in the field between comprehensibility, intelligibility, and foreign accent. And these are the definitions according to Darwin and Monroe. And intelligibility, it refers to accuracy of understanding. It is the extent to which a listener has understood what a speaker said. Comprehensibility, on the other hand, refers to easiness of understanding, and it is the degree of effort that a listener requires to understand a message. And these two concepts are different from foreign accent, which is an accent in a second language that comes up as a result of influence from the first language on the second language. So here we are talking about speech production that is different from what is expected in terms of native speaking norms. So you can see that both intelligibility and comprehensibility are similar terms, but that in fact they refer to different dimensions of second language speech. And both of them are different from a foreign accent in this case. Here we also have a couple of related principles that we also need to understand. Traditionally, pronunciation has been taught under one of these two principles. A lot of pronunciation teaching and research, it's still reflected in the use of what Lewis calls a nativeness principle. And the nativeness principle is basically the notion that the purpose of pronunciation teaching is to help second language learners sound native-like, and that all elements of a foreign accent are undesirable in second language speech. In contrast, the intelligibility principle, according to Lewis, is the notion that the main purpose of pronunciation is, the main purpose of pronunciation teaching is to help learners sound intelligible by focusing on aspects of an accent that can actually affect comprehension. Recent surveys of pronunciation studies have demonstrated that the intelligibility principle has been used to a lesser extent. But there are reasons to anchor pronunciation practices on intelligibility principles rather than nativeness principles. First, most second language learners will end up with some type of foreign accent. It is just a natural part of learning a second language. So there's really no purpose in trying to make learners sound native-like. And in addition to that, there's also the case that intelligibility and comprehensibility are partially independent from foreign accents, since second language speech can be intelligible and comprehensible despite the presence of a foreign accent. Studies of ultimate attainment of second language speech have also determined that even speakers who reach very high proficiency levels don't necessarily perform like native speakers of the L2, and the few that seem to do should be seen more as exceptions to the rule and not necessarily the norm. But even highly proficient speakers who pass for native speakers of the language, of the second language, may feel some types of discomfort in some cases. So according to Pillar, for example, some of these speakers may feel some type of threat to their first language identity when other people think, or when other people assume that they are native speakers of the L2 because of the way they sound. And finally, studies have shown that even when students say that they want to sound like native speakers of the language, what they mean is that they want to sound intelligible. They just don't necessarily know how to express that. So there are plenty of reasons to follow intelligibility principles in class. Now, in order to understand a bit more the importance of pronunciation in oral communication in intercultural contexts, we need to understand also the current social linguistic landscape of the English language, which brings us to the field of word Englishes.
Good. Oh, nice.
Model to explain the expansion of English worldwide. We find three different settings if we take into consideration Cashu's circle model. And the first is the inner circle, in which English is the native language for most speakers, and this is in places like England, Canada, the United States, Australia, or New Zealand. And second place, we have what is called the outer circle, and it is here where we find local varieties of English that have come up in these places as a result of historical and colonial factors, countries like India, Singapore, or some of the countries in the Caribbean, for example. And in most of these countries, it's important to say English has an official status together with some of the other local languages. And finally, we have the expanding circle, which is countries where English is spoken as a foreign language. So here we have countries like Brazil, Korea, Japan, Mexico, China, for example. Now, this model seems simple, and it is indeed one of the most common used in the field of word Englishes, but it has also been criticized because, as you can think, the status of English around the world is not that simple. It's not that clear cut. So, for example, there are speakers from the outer and expanding circles living in inner circle countries, for example, communities of immigrants or international students who come to these countries. Or it's also the case that there are countries in the expanding circle where we have large communities of speakers from the from the inner circle and also from the outer circle communicating with each other. But in spite of all these issues, what's important to understand here is that English is used all over the world for different reasons, and pronunciation is key for communication among speakers of different circles. So not just communication between native speakers and non-native speakers, but also communication among groups of language speakers from the different circles. So speakers who don't necessarily share the same native language background. So this means that there are more speakers of English in the expanding circle than in the inner and outer circles combined. So if you take into account this fact, it means that there are more speakers of English around the world whose native language is not English, as opposed to speakers of English who are in fact native speakers. And what this means is that statistically in global communication settings, we may find more interactions in English among groups of non-native speakers of the language, as opposed to interactions between just native speakers and non-native speakers. As a result of all of this, of course, it's also the case that the number of non-native speaking teachers of English around the world is way higher than the number of native speaking teachers at present. And as pointed out by specialists, this obviously has important implications for English language teaching in general, for issues like materials development, teacher education, and teacher training purposes. So if we think about the social linguistic landscape of English around the world at present, in terms of pronunciation instruction, relying on the nativeness principle for teaching pronunciation is just unrealistic, and in many cases not appropriate. And for different reasons. First, a native-like accent is not necessary to fully integrate into an L2 environment and carry out professional tasks in job settings or academic tasks. Second, because of the status of English around the world and its condition of lingua franca, there are many settings in which native-speaking norms may be inappropriate. So a native-like accent may not necessarily be desirable in many of those cases. And third, and most importantly, in terms of teaching, having a native-like accent is not a requirement for pronunciation pedagogy, when there are many other important factors that come into play when teaching pronunciation. So because the majority of teachers who are in a position to implement pronunciation instruction are in fact non-native speaking teachers, and because of the previous aspects mentioned before, there's the question that naturally comes up, which is, should non-native speaking teachers teach pronunciation? And the answer to that question is it's an emphatic yes. And there are several reasons to support that and to encourage more non-native speaking teachers to implement pronunciation teaching in their classes. First of all, some of the same issues that prevent teachers from implementing pronunciation instruction in class are not exclusive of non-native speaking teachers or native speaking teachers. They are actually shared by both groups of speakers. For example, one aspect that has been well documented in the research literature is that many teachers don't feel comfortable teaching pronunciation because of limited training in different areas, different key areas like phonetics and phonology and second language speech development. What's interesting is that these survey studies have shown that it's both native speaking and non-native speaking teachers who don't feel comfortable about their preparation. Some of these studies have found that many teachers, both native and non-native, simply don't teach pronunciation at all in their classes, or sometimes when they do it in the form of error correction only, so not in a systematic way. Many non-native speaking teachers don't feel comfortable teaching pronunciation because because of their own foreign accent. But actually, as explained by Borg, this is a phenomenon that is consistent among teachers in many other foreign language contexts, not just TESOL teachers, but also teachers, foreign language teachers of other languages as well. And in fact, many of these same issues are parallel with those faced by non-native speaking teachers of other foreign languages like German, Spanish, French, at least in the US, in the context of the US. And this resonates a lot with what has been found, has been found before in other areas, which is that language teachers go through some of the same issues during their careers, regardless of their status as native or non-native speaking. More specifically, there are several reasons why more non-native speaking teachers should teach pronunciation. It's been demonstrated already that non-native speaking teachers can be as effective as native speaking teachers in delivering systematic and sound instruction that could help learners achieve comprehensible speech. And this was tested by Levis and colleagues in the 2016 study, in which two different teachers, a native speaking teacher and a non-native speaking teacher, taught two different pronunciation classes. And in the end, learners from both classes presented gains in comprehensibility that were not significantly different from each other. And what seems to mark a difference in cases like this, it's not the native or non-native speaking status, but actually the pronunciation pedagogy that comes out as a result of different factors. And one of them is training. It's been demonstrated that both types of teachers who receive training in pronunciation pedagogy present a variety of skills that allow them to implement sound pedagogical practices. It's also the case that in addition to training, which is essential, some teachers also develop part of their knowledge base of pronunciation teaching through previous teaching and learning experiences. And this is particularly interesting in the case of non-native speaking teachers, because many of them were learners themselves at some point. Also, this knowledge base is key to implement systematic instruction that could help learners understand differences between the L1 and the L2, such as with the use of meta-language in class when delivering explicit instruction, or when providing corrective feedback, or in some cases, using their knowledge of their learners L1 to make comparisons with the L2. That's not always the case. This is something that it's not always possible, but sometimes when it is possible, it's also an advantage that some of these teachers have. Now, it's also the case that more experienced non-native speaking teachers don't necessarily see themselves as less prepared to teach pronunciation, but they see themselves as having a professional identity that, one, has demonstrated to them that a native-like accent is not necessary to teach pronunciation. Two, that their knowledge base has made them aware of their students' needs in terms of pronunciation teaching. And three, that they also have the skills to address those learner needs. And finally, specialists like John Murphy have expressed that non-native speaking teachers who present intelligible and comprehensible speech should teach pronunciation, and there are different reasons for it. For example, Murphy claimed that intelligible and comprehensible non-native speaking models can be positively used in the classroom, and that there are reasons why non-native speaking teachers should feel more confident than they usually do about pronunciation teaching. For example, as we discussed before, the number of non-native speaking teachers of English around the world is much higher than the number of native speaking teachers. So as a consequence, more learners are being taught English by non-native speaking teachers. So it makes sense to expose learners to the types of varieties of English that they are more likely to encounter outside of the class in different settings. We also know that the first year of second language learning is critical for pronunciation development, and this is what Derwin and Monroe referred to as the window of maximal opportunity, in which pronunciation aspects are more likely to change during that first year of instruction. So this means also that waiting until learners reach an intermediate or an advanced stage in order to start working on their pronunciation, it's kind of doing a disservice to the students. So it's important to start exposing them to intelligible and comprehensible models. And also, most learners won't reach a native-like accent. So an intelligible non-native model can set realistic aspirational expectations for most students. And at the same time, Murphy also states that even native-speaking teachers should supplement some of their pronunciation classes with non-native speaking models in order to demonstrate to students that, well, it's not necessary to sound native-like, but intelligible and comprehensible pronunciation is more important for communicative purposes. Now, as I mentioned previously, many non-native speaking teachers don't feel confident teaching pronunciation because of their accent, and that's very common. But it seems that there is some type of paradigm shift currently taking place, because recent research demonstrates that some non-native speaking teachers have started to embrace the idea that using only a native speaking model like General American English or received pronunciation should not be the only yardsticks that we use for pronunciation purposes. And this is a bit complicated, as Art Chen exposed in a recent article. On the one hand, General American English and received pronunciation have traditionally been the models used in many expanding circles. And some teachers use those models because they consider it's professional and it's prestigious to speak with characteristics of those models. But what's interesting is that a lot of these same teachers who prefer General American English and received pronunciation models also claim that speaking with such an accent it's not necessary to be intelligible in that other non-native accent models or non-standard models should also be incorporated into pronunciation teaching. So as pointed out by Chen, this is a change in perspective that is currently taking place. It's possible that more awareness in teacher training and in teaching preparation programs about issues like word English, English as a lingua franca, English as an international language, is starting to change perspectives on teaching, and that little by little, many teachers have started to realize that in the current globalized world, second language learners need language for communicative purposes, and that they need to be intelligible and comprehensible, and that speaking with a native-like accent is not a requirement for successful communication with second language speakers of different native language backgrounds. So yes, non-native speaking teachers should have a more active role in pronunciation teaching. Of course, as I said before, I'm not claiming that either native or non-native speaking teachers are better than the other when it comes to pronunciation teaching. But what I am saying is that non-native speaking teachers who have traditionally felt underprepared for teaching pronunciation because of their accent should venture more to teach pronunciation. So in light of that, I would like to discuss some aspects and present a couple of tips that teachers, both native and non-native, can do to implement pronunciation instruction in their classes to enhance oral communication in intercultural contexts. What I'm going to present now is related to 3 different aspects that are important for teachers to implement pronunciation teaching. The first aspect is ongoing training in pronunciation pedagogy. The second aspect is to expose learners in class to different types of English accents, both native and non-native. And the third aspect is to focus on linguistic features that are known to enhance intelligibility in L2 speech. And I will discuss each one of these in more detail now. So the first aspect is ongoing training in pronunciation pedagogy. It's been demonstrated that training in pronunciation pedagogy is critical to implement appropriate teaching techniques. Research has demonstrated consistently that many undergraduate and graduate programs don't necessarily prepare teachers to teach pronunciation. And while research has also shown that there are changes. This is an issue that's still going on, and it's one issue to be concerned in many second language teacher education programs. This lack of training is reflected on teachers' limited knowledge in three key areas that are essential to implement pronunciation pedagogy. And those are basic knowledge of phonetics and phonology, knowledge of second language speech development theory, and ways to help teachers develop pedagogical content knowledge to teach pronunciation with actual practices in the class. While many teachers want to teach pronunciation, but they didn't receive any preparation to do so, there are different resources that have become available in the last 10 or 15 years. For example, there are different types of volumes that have been published, from research-oriented literature to understand second language speech development phenomena, to more practical, pedagogically oriented literature, or sometimes a combination of both. These are some of the volumes published in recent years, and all of them are in a continuum of research-oriented literature or pedagogically oriented literature, or sometimes a little of both aspects. Also, the annual Pronunciation and Second Language Learning and Teaching Conference publishes a set of proceedings each year. They are free, and you can download them from the English department website of Iowa State University, or you can just give them a quick Google search as Proceedings of the Pronunciation and Second Language Learning and Teaching Conference. They contain lots of relevant information from research findings that can inform teaching practices, and they also contain more practical teaching tips to implement in the classroom. In addition to these resources, there are also different opportunities for professional development for teachers interested in learning more about pronunciation teaching. I know that Tim Cochin and John Levis recently offered an online course to help teachers interested in pronunciation teaching. I'm not sure if they will offer it again in the near future. And here is Tim Cochin's email in case that you want to contact him. He actually gave me permission for this. So I don't know if this is something that will be offered in the future, but my point is opportunities like this are becoming more and more available nowadays. There are also specific websites that offer teaching activities and suggestions, or relevant information about second language speech development to take into consideration when implementing pronunciation teaching. One of them, a very good one, is pronunciationforteachers.com, which offers lots of resources in terms of teaching techniques, teaching tips, videos, sometimes snapshots of 1 or 2 page summaries of important issues that teachers need to understand to implement pronunciation teaching. There's also the website English as a Lingua Franca Pronunciation, with relevant information for the teaching of pronunciation as a lingua franca, pronunciation in English in lingua franca contexts. And another website that presents very nice teaching tips, games, and activities is Hancock McDonald. This is from Mark Hancock and Annie McDonald, who are well-known pronunciation materials developers. And another way to engage in ongoing training is by joining a professional organization. So professional organizations like TESOL and IETFL have their own special interest sections and interest groups for pronunciation. And those interest sections and groups provide lots of ongoing training in the form of webinars, coffee hours, workshops, newsletter publications, and mini conferences. And of course, another way of participating in ongoing training is by attending conferences. Aside from the big conferences like TESOL, IETFL, and AAAL, that where you can find pronunciation strands, there are conferences that specialize in pronunciation teaching and learning, such as PESL, Accents, and IETFL's Pronunciation Special Interest Group own conference. The IETFL's Pronunciation Conference was this past October, but this is one that takes place every year. So you will get it again next year around October, November. Also, the next PESEL conference will take place from June 16 to 18 of next year at Brook University, Canada. And the Accents Conference, it's very soon, will take place online on December 9th to 11th of this year. This conference will be hosted by the University of Lodz in Poland, but this year it will take place online, so there are more opportunities for more people to attend. The interesting aspect about these conferences is that they present a mixture of theoretical research-oriented presentations, but they also showcase results that have implications for classroom instruction. And they also include teaching-oriented presentations, workshops, demonstrations, teaching techniques, etc. The second aspect that I want to discuss is the importance of exposing learners to different accents of English when teaching pronunciation. From an acquisitional perspective, there are advantages in exposing learners to a continuum of different accents, both native and non-native. For example, research in laboratory phonology has demonstrated that exposing learners to multiple voices producing the same sound helps learners in the formation of sound categories, and the perception of differences between one sound and another is more robust when learners are exposed to multiple samples of multiple voices of the same sound. And this is something that has been studied by implementing a technique called high variability phonetic training, which consists of training learners to perceive sounds, hearing different voices over and over, producing the same sounds. And one of the advantages of this technique is that it's been demonstrated that when learners are able to distinguish the differences between sounds as a result of this training, then they are also able to produce differences in those sounds. And so this supports Flege's speech learning model that claims that gain in perception are eventually also extended to gains in production. There are a couple of online resources you can use to expose learners to different varieties of English. There's the site English Accent Coach, and this is a site created by Professor Ron Thompson from Brook University in Canada for practicing discrimination between vowels and consonant sounds using the high variability phonetic training technique that I just mentioned. There is also the site Youglish, which provides opportunities for hearing different speakers pronouncing specific words. So if you enter a word there, you could hear different examples of the word using a variety of actual contexts. So this is also something that could be useful to expose learners to different accents in a way. So let me show you just very briefly. Okay, this is the English Accent Coach. So just to show you quickly. Okay, so let's play the game. So let's do vowels. Okay, and you can register and log in. Okay, for now we are going to use it as a guest. Okay, to do things quickly. This is just to give you a demonstration of the way that it works. So this is short level. So let's begin with level 1. Okay, and the sounds, we can choose all of the different sounds, or we can choose a contrast. So okay, let's choose this contrast, A versus A. Okay, and we will hear the vowel sounds in this context with the consonant H, okay, at the beginning. So we begin, we click proceed, and we hear the different sounds, and we have to choose which one we are hearing.
Hey.
Okay, so this is A.
Ha. Hey. Hey. Hey.
Okay? And you also get feedback in case that there are some of those that are not correct. So this is just to give you an idea of how this works using the, now I don't see the slides. Okay, the other website is Youglish. And here you can type any type of word. So let's say, okay, let's say the word often, which is a high frequency word, but it's one that people pronounce in different ways. So you can hear different speakers uttering the word in context.
And often commits great harm in the present in order to get there. Well,
How often do you get it?
Goodness
In your own
gracious.
life?
I mean,
work and family. We often have two phrases that we use to describe what we do.
From making long, arduous, expensive, and often pointless journeys to those hospitals.
Okay, so you can see this is also another way to expose learners to different varieties, different pronunciations. So let me, how do I go back here to my, I feel like I cannot go back to the actual, okay, well, let's continue. Oh, here it is. Okay, and of course, it's important to show learners that there are indeed non-native speakers of the language who are highly intelligible and comprehensible. These are just a few well-known celebrities, politicians, scientists, and diplomats who are intelligible non-native speakers of English. So bringing models like this to the class for pedagogical purposes could give learners a good idea of what they could achieve as successful speakers of the language. This brings me to my next point, which is to focus on aspects that enhance intelligibility in class. This could be done by focusing on aspects that we know from research in second language speech development that tend to enhance intelligibility, such as prosodic or suprasegmental aspects like stress, rhythm, and intonation, connected speech phenomena like linking, appropriate and natural pauses and thought groups. Vowels and consonants are also important, of course, but sometimes there are time constraints, for example. So you could focus on vowels and consonants that could be problematic for students because of their native language or because of their functional load. The functional load, it's a parameter or ranking that establishes how likely certain vowels and consonants, how likely they are to create problems in communication if they are confused. So for example, it sounds like pa and ba, bilabial stops could be problematic if they get confused. Think about all the different minimal pairs that we have with those sounds, right? Like back, pack, pet, bed, bid, pit, etc. But some other sounds like the interdental fricatives, like the TH sounds that we call them sometimes, those tend to have a very low functional load. They are not necessarily going to cause huge miscommunications if they get confused. So something like think versus think, it's probably not going to create a huge misunderstanding. And for example, there are ways to help learners to focus on those aspects that enhance intelligibility. There should be some focus on suprasegmentals or prosody in pronunciation, but without eliminating segmental instruction altogether. So we saw previously aspects like word and sentence stress, rhythm, intonation, connected speech. The aspects like linking help the enhancement of intelligibility in L2 speech, but it's also important to pay attention to vowels and consonants that could be problematic for students because of differences with their native language or because of their functional load. I always remember one of my students used this very nice analogy saying that teaching pronunciation is like cooking, where your main ingredients should be your suprasegmentals, but you spice them up with vowels and consonants. And that's what's going to give your speech that nice intelligibility flavor, let's say. So yes, focus on suprasegmentals but don't forget about specific vowels and consonants. Another important aspect is to maintain a focus on speaking activities. Many teachers conceptualize pronunciation instruction as repetition of phrases and sentences or minimal pairs, but words, phrases, and sentences are not discourse, and we need learners to be able to use the forms we teach in natural communication. So whether you're teaching pronunciation in a standalone pronunciation class or integrated into a class that covers other skills, it's important to have actual speaking activities. This brings me to my next point, which is to capitalize on the link between listening, speaking, and pronunciation. So for example, taking a listening activity beyond answering some comprehension questions, but actually taking part of a passage to examine some of the nitty-gritty details like stressed syllables, intonational contours and the different meanings, or the use of pauses or aspects like linking and those types of things. And some of these activities can be done by focusing obviously on larger pieces of discourse. So not just minimal pairs or phrases and sentences, but showing learners how pronunciation works with larger pieces of discourse. And you don't have to use very long passages. For this, it could be something short like this. So this is what people, for example, this is what people like John Murphy and Colleen Myers and others recommend. You get a video or just the audio of a short passage by an intelligible speaker, either a native speaker or a non-native speaker. The first thing you do is you give learners the script without any punctuation, so no periods, no commas, or anything like that. And then based on that, you ask learners to look for different features that you're studying with them as part of your pronunciation content. So for example, here is a passage I used before with my students in Costa Rica. This is an interview with former NASA astronaut Franklin Chang Diaz, who is originally from Costa Rica. And here he is talking about the first time he went to space and when he came to the US. His story is very remarkable. So this is someone my students in Costa Rica knew very well, but they rarely heard him speak in English. And he's actually very, very intelligible. So let me just play the audio for you to listen to him. It's very short.
I was actually on the Space Shuttle Columbia once, getting ready for liftoff. And it reminded me of that scene in the box. And I felt that I had already done this before. This is one of the most interesting feelings I had while I was waiting for liftoff in the shuttle. When I came to the US, I faced the, the same challenges that every immigrant faces. You have to learn the language. I didn't speak English, and usually there's not enough money, so you didn't have any money. And language, money, being in a completely different culture, dealing with discrimination, perhaps, some level of it, and all of these things are workable. And little by little, you just get educated and learn to be part of this society and contribute to it.
So you give learners a transcript like this with no punctuation so that they figure out different things depending on the focus of your class, depending on the pronunciation content that you are analyzing. So and from there, you can do different things, like in this case, figuring out the different thought groups and where thought groups and pauses could be. Obviously, when students do this, they can do it individually or in pairs, and then you play the audio so that they can check if their information was correct, if their guesses were correct or not. After that, they can focus on some other aspects, like in this case, word stress, where proper stress falls in words of more than one syllable, connected speech phenomena like linking, marking where specific sounds are joined across word boundaries, and how some of them may be deleted, or in some cases they change to a different sound because of linking. But you can also focus on specific issues like segmentals, like in this case, the pronunciation of the final S, in plural nouns, possessives, and verbs in third person singular, which have three different types of pronunciation. So making sure that students can identify where they would have those three different types of pronunciations. Here's another example of a speaker that I have, which is Carlos Alvarado, president of Costa Rica, but I'm not going to play the audio because I'm running out of time. But basically, it's something very similar. In this case, you could look for different aspects, like in this case, words that have vowel reductions. But think about other aspects that could be problematic for learners depending on their native language, like differences between the liquids, R and L, differences in voicing, in bilabial stops, B versus P, specific consonant clusters, reductions, intonation, sentence stress, etc. So then after working on the passage, learners can practice reading it by putting into practice everything that they marked. And this can be done in one of two ways. One of them is mirroring. And mirroring is a technique that it's basically reading the same passage, trying to imitate not just the pronunciation, but also the gestures and body language of the speaker. The other technique is shadowing, and shadowing is repeating different phrases or sentences after the speaker, but only after a short delay. So students will probably need to have the audio in order to do that. What's interesting about these techniques is that they have been tested in classes, and they have shown that learners improve different aspects like their intonation, rhythm, comprehensibility in general, and their overall confidence in speaking in the L2. Also, communicative activities, okay, at the end, and I'm going to skip this part here because I'm running out of time. But in conclusion, intelligible second language pronunciation is key for intercultural communication, and this is very important nowadays in the context of English, where there's more communication not only between native and non-native speakers, but also between speakers, groups of non-native speakers who don't share the same language background. Also, both native and non-native speaking teachers can be effective at the moment of implementing pronunciation instruction. And what makes a difference in the type of implementation is their knowledge base of pronunciation pedagogy. Hopefully, more non-native speaking teachers will venture to in pronunciation teaching in the near future. And finally, it's important to include different non-native models as part of our classes. Whether you are a native or a non-native speaking teacher, it's important to expose learners to different accents, native and non-native, because this could help learners not only from an acquisitional perspective, but also because it will be valuable to have an experience of understanding accents that they are more likely to encounter in different contexts. And before I go, I would like to thank the Intercultural Communication Interest section of TESOL International for the opportunity to talk to all of you today. I would like to especially thank the co-chairs, Jennifer Lacroix and Natalia Baladiskova, for their invitation. I would also like to thank my colleague, Lena Barrantes Elizondo, for our continuous and interesting discussions of all these issues and for her comments on a previous version of this webinar. And finally, I would like to thank all of you in the audience for your attention and your interest in these issues. And I will be very happy to answer any questions that you may have right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. It's indeed, as many people are saying in the chat, if you can see the chat, such a wonderful webinar full of interesting resources that we can definitely, put into practice, not just theories, but also something that we can go and put into our classrooms right now. People are saying it's informative, it's resourceful, and we so much appreciate you talking to us today. If you have any more questions, we have some time to kind of follow up with Joshua on some of the ideas that he put in forward in his presentation. I actually wanted to ask you, because we work a lot on the issues of intercultural communication, and there's definitely certain cultural stereotypes that are attached to different accents and different ways of speaking. And there is a lot of research that comes out from different fields, from cognitive psychology, from applied linguistics, from sociocultural linguistics, that kind of look into what is the issue with these stereotypes. And you kind of talked on that a little bit more, is that people don't feel empowered to teach pronunciation, being speakers of English as an additional language. So have you come across with this issue of cultural stereotyping with the accents, and that what can we do to kind of combat that?
It is. It's something that it's very common, because as we know, foreign accents or accents trigger all types of stereotypes and other types of feelings. That's very common. What it's important to understand is that despite the accents, speech can be very intelligible and comprehensible. But one thing that sometimes people forget is that intelligibility or that understanding, it's also there's also a lot of responsibility on the part of the hearer, right? So in many cases, it's been noticed that people decide not to understand somebody just because of their accent without making an effort. Okay. It's also the case sometimes that, and this is what's called reverse linguistic stereotype, and that sometimes people may judge the speech of another speaker just because of their physical appearance, right? So there are definitely issues related to accents, but I think that I would say it from the point of view of a second language speaker of English, like in my case, I've tried to focus on issues on what I can control, right? On what I can control. So as long as your speech can be intelligible and comprehensible, that should be enough for pronunciation teaching purposes as a teacher. But it's definitely the issue of accents. It's definitely there, and I think that as language educators, as applied linguists, we also have the responsibility of educating some of our students about these issues. That just because somebody has a specific accent doesn't mean that the person is not understandable, that the person is not intelligible, or that you can judge certain things about the person just because of that accent.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we're seeing so much kind of so many similar arguments coming from the English as a foreign language camp of our colleagues, right, who are not native speakers of English, so to say, who are not from the inner circle, and who are teaching their students who are also in the same context. And it's great that you kind of spoke to that, because these are the conversations that we will continue in other webinars. And again, we so appreciate you taking time to talk to us and sharing your research, such informative presentation full of resources, ideas, and suggestions. For all of you who have joined us today, thank you again so much for taking time to be with us. Special thank you to Joshua, our presenter. Our webinar for today is concluded, and we will have the recording available to you in 1 week. You may now disconnect. We wish you a great rest of the week, a great rest of the afternoon for those of you who are in our time zones. And thank you again, Joshua, for taking time to talk to our membership today.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. I know that we ran out of late for that, but please feel free to send me an email, and I'll try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Joshua. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.